How are you all? Nice. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, we're competing with Denver Startup Week, as you can see on the board behind me here. So, kind of a smaller crew of us tonight, but thank you all for being here. It's always a pleasure to see people come out on a Tuesday evening, especially when it's a nice night and our evening hours are beginning to wane. So, I appreciate you spending your evenings with us. We've got a couple great talks for you tonight. So, let's move on to the first items on the agenda here. If it's your first time here, just want to let you know that obviously free food and beverage right in front of you. And in addition to that, we have restrooms just directly across the hall. There are gender-neutral restrooms over there, and then there's, I think, gender-specific restrooms around the bank of the elevators over near the entrance to Turing. So that pretty much covers that. We want to, of course, thank our sponsors for tonight. Gusto stepped up big time, and they've committed to sponsoring a number of our events here in the next 6 to 12 months. So we're super grateful to have them be a part of the meetup, and perhaps you've seen them around town here, especially lately. I think they're trying to hire a lot of positions, so we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. In addition to Gusto, I want to thank Turing and Salt. Both of them have been extremely supportive of this meetup really for the last 2 years. So we couldn't do it without them and without all of our sponsors for that matter. So a huge thanks to them. Also, our Open Collective. I don't know if you guys have checked that out or not, but we like to crowdsource some of our donations when possible. So we haven't really had any on there recently, but we have a number of contributors up there. You can see now. That really helps us pay for some expenses, like streaming equipment, just our regular sponsorship of food and beverage and things like that. It's not always easy finding a sponsor for every event, so we have had moments where we've had to actually dip into our Open Collective, and that's been extremely helpful for all of us, in keeping this thing going. So. Huge thanks to them. And yeah, we also, our organizing team has been on the React Colorado Slack for a while here, and wanted to kind of open that up. I think Will Klein is now running the Slack team, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But we're pretty active on there, at least all of us organizers. That's where we chat, and there are a number of people at least in the state of Colorado, who use React and chat on there. So if you have any interest, check that out. Want to give an opportunity for anybody who's written up on the board here to chat about any job openings they have, anybody hiring that wants to come down and say a quick word. David?
You can line up behind me too, if you want to come up. Yeah, we can just run through these. So I work for Gusto. We're sponsoring, super grateful for them for helping us out with this meetup. And we have a couple positions open. They're full stack positions with Rails and React. We're right on 16th Street Mall, right down the street. So if you're interested, feel free to ask me any questions after the meetup.
Hey guys, I'm Clayton Weller. I'm from Hotel Engine. We just closed our Series A, got $16 million, so we need to hire some devs. Woo! Yeah, we're looking for Node and React. If you want to do React, you'll be working on another team. If you do Node, you'll be working with me on the tech debt team. We're going away from Rails, moving to Node. So if you're interested in Lambda, come check it out.
Hey guys, I'm Ryan. I work for a small digital marketing agency up in Broomfield. We got a React Native project, and we're going to need some consulting. It's just a contract. So feel free to reach out. I may have to head out early, so feel free to send me an email. It's up here.
Anybody else? Yeah.
There's also the Denver Startup Week job fair is tomorrow night, 6 to 9 at McNichols.
Thanks for shouting that out. I actually found one of my first jobs in Denver at the Denver Startup Week job fair. So, yeah, that's a great place to go if you're looking to find a startup job, obviously. So, cool. Moving on. I think we have some announcements. I know one in particular, but Anybody else besides Clayton? I want you to go last because it's a good one. Anybody else have an announcement? Things going on in the community? Things you want to shout out? All right. Well, let's send Clayton down then. Yeah.
Here I am again. So Hotel Engine, along with Worldwide Technology and AWS and Denver React Meetup and Indie Coders Denver, a bunch of different groups have gone together. We're going to do a 24-hour hackathon. It's going to be October 25th and 26th. Starts in the evening. You come with an idea, you get it on a team, maybe you code all night, who knows? But then the next day, you just code all day, and then in the evening, we have some judges. We got our first one definitely locked in from Techstars, so that's going to be great. And there's going to be a cash prize, so it might make like $1,000 for 24 hours of work, so it might be worth it. If you're interested in that, just contact me, email there, or go to bit.ly/mhhacks, all uppercase. All uppercase. If you do it lowercase, it won't work. But yes, I would love to hang out with you guys and build some stuff. So that's a great way to do it without becoming a person who sees me every day.
Thanks, Clayton. Our Twitter account also, we did tweet that out recently, the link to the sign up. So feel free to check that out. It should be a great event. David, did you have something? Sure.
Excellent. All right, back up again. There's a new meetup. GraphQL Denver is starting up, and they're going to have an event next month. It's going to be Tuesday the 22nd, 6 p.m. at Gusto, right down the street. So hopefully we'll see you all there. Should be good.
Nice. Cool. I think that pretty much covers it for announcements. Anybody have something come up? No? Okay. Moving on. I think we're ready to welcome our first speaker. So Daria has been great. She's very active in the community here. So she was kind enough to offer to present tonight. So please give her a round of applause. She's going to be presenting to us on Mobx and Xstate.
Hello. Okay, cool. You can hear me. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Daria, and welcome to React Meetup. I will be talking to you today about Mobx with Xstate for elegant React state management. As one of my friends mentioned, the first two words sounded to her like Pig Latin, and they may sound like that to you as well. But hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be more knowledgeable and you'll know what you're talking about. So we'll go through some core concepts, some reasoning, and we'll try to do a quick demo. I'll try to, squeeze all that in about 20 to 30 minutes. So I'll be talking fast. So I'll start with a quick introduction. So my name is Daria Caldwell, and I'm currently a full-stack developer at Cuddlesoft. Cuddlesoft is a creative agency. We do product development, and we work across different stacks, React, React Native, Python. We're led by a core Python developer, Emily Morehouse, and we're currently looking for some Python developers. If you're interested, come talk to me. Previously, I worked at Charter Communications, which is a big company. Also, before that, I worked at Baker Technologies, which is a small startup. And before that, about 2.5 years ago, I graduated from Galvanize cohort G43. Technologies that I've built production-level apps include this laundry list of various React, Redux, React Native, Mobx, GraphQL, Vue, Vuex, Node, and Loopback. And all that I use to build forms and dashboards. I build a lot of forms and dashboards. Sometimes, it's great. It gave me a lot of opportunities to hone my skills in forms and dashboards, but sometimes it feels like the entire web just consists of forms and dashboards. We're going to go through reasoning for Mobx, reasoning for Xstate, and then some core concepts. Starting with Mobx, I heard this phrase for the first time at Python conference 2 weeks ago, and I really liked it. Fastest time, it provides fastest time to dopamine. What that means is that number one or number two, I don't know, two most common complaints that I hear about when starting a React project with Redux, it's that it's a lot of boilerplate and there's a huge learning curve, or there's a steep learning curve. Mobx setup is relatively inexpensive, so you can get started in about like an hour, set up and get going. And there's only 4 main concepts that you really need to wrap your head around, which we're gonna go through over today. And then you can get started immediately. So these 2 major arguments combined provide you with the fastest time to dopamine. Feeling like you can start building something without spending or wasting your time on setup. And then the second one is reacting to state changes is always better than acting on state changes. And that was an argument made by the developer for Mobx, or the core developer for Mobx. And that means that when your state changes, you always need to create implicit subscriptions to changes in the state so that the rest of your app stays in sync. And as your app grows, you will eventually either oversubscribe to those state changes, triggering unnecessary re-renders, or you will undersubscribe and your app will get out of sync with state. Mobx solves this issue by managing the observers and observable data for you. So why use Xstate? So there's a lot of complexities involved in UI management. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about forms. And with forms, there's such things as erratic user input, there's loading, there's error states, there's validation of multiple fields. If you've ever built a form, you probably dealt with something like that, like where you store maybe like an error key and then the error message, and then you kind of like go through the entire form and validate like, field by field. I know I've done that and that was a pain and I don't ever want to do that again. So when I discovered Xstate, I was like, holy crap, I've been waiting for this. Like, where has it been all my life? So this is amazing. And then the other main reasoning for using Xstate is that it essentially separates your data management from your UI logic. So there's your data management, which you can store data in your Mobx or Redux, and then your UI logic, which is like changing loading, changing errors, that kind of stuff. There's a really good answer on Stack Overflow that is written by one of the Xstate creators, and you're welcome to check it out if you want more details. So some drawbacks of both libraries is that there aren't as many Stack Overflow questions answered, and there aren't a lot of tutorials created. So kind of like, it feels a little bit like going out in the wild, with just like a little pocket knife of your intelligence. But that's why we're here. I'm here to share some of the tools so that hopefully it will feel, more natural and a little bit easier when you're wild on your own adventures. So core concepts of Mobx and Xstate. Let's go. Mobx. Like I said, there's 4 for Mobx, and then there's 7 for Xstate, so bear with me. For Mobx, the very first thing is observable state. This is how easy it is to set up your observable state. What do we mean by observable state? It is any value that can be mutated or might serve as a source for computed values. So in this case, we're just declaring a user, and then we're declaring a message as a string, and the other one is an object. Out of the box, Mobx can make most types of values, such as primitives, arrays, classes, objects, and even potentially references, observable. So literally, this is all you have to do to set up your observable state. I mean, in some Babel, configurations. Next thing is computed values. So anything that can be computed by using a function that purely operates on observable state is called computed value. We've done that many times before. It can be a simple string concatenation, like in this example, or it can be as complex as deriving object graphs and visualizations, which we'll be talking about later. Next two concepts are actions and reactions. So actions are the primary way to modify your state. And actions are not reactions to state changes, but take sources of change, like user events or incoming data from like WebSockets connection and stuff like that. And then reactions is what basically React calls side effects. So if you're familiar with React, hopefully you are, you know, you do things like data fetching, setting up a subscription, and manually changing the DOM in React. So anytime the DOM updates, that's called a side effect. And this is another concept for Mobx. So to summarize it all, you basically have an observable state. You have some computed values that you may want to display for the UI in a slightly different way. And then you have actions to modify that state. And then that triggers your reactions to keep your entire app in sync. Now, moving on to core concepts Xstate. So Xstate is going to be a little bit more complicated just because it's a newer technology, at least in my head. But it's really cool because whether you are familiar with this technology or not, you probably have been using that for a while anyway, already. So starting with the concept that Xstate is actually based on is called finite state machine. And finite state machine is a mathematical model of computation. Basically, it is an abstract machine that can be in exactly one of a finite number of states at any given time. The FSM can change from one state to another in response to some external inputs. The change from one state to another is called a transition. An FSM is defined by a list of its states, its initial state, and the conditions for each transition. So that's just like a very dry Wikipedia definition of it. But as we're going through these concepts, you'll basically, again, realize that you've been already doing that. And you are very familiar with those things. So the first thing is states. For my sample demo, I will be showing you a very simple form of like user email, user password, and then submit button. And when you think about it, your app or your UI can be in one of these states. Data entry when the user is entering some information, awaiting response when you clicked on submit, email in one of the three error states, email error, password error, service error, and then your success state, which is signed in. This is not dictated by Xstate, this is dictated by you. The only thing is, don't worry about syntax too much right now, but you define that in this property called states, which is just a plain object, and then you define all your states in there. Right now, we're setting them to plain objects, but as we go through, you'll see that there is more information that you put in those objects, such as transitions. So now that we've defined our states, we need to know how to transition elegantly from one state to the next. So in data entry, we can be in enter email, enter password, email blur, password blur, and submit states, right? That all sounds familiar, that like we do that all the time with forms already. And then in the email error, we have transition called enter email, which means that once there is an email error and the user starts entering email again, we want that error to go away. We want it to enter again the data entry state so that it doesn't display red warning message, it doesn't have like specific styles, and so on. Next, context. Xstate library provides you with this property on machine configuration called context, where you can save all the information about that particular form or that UI just for the time being, so as you're interacting with it. And again, for this demo, we're only saving email and password, but it can be as long and complicated as you want it to be. Now, actions. Actions enable side effects to be triggered when a transition occurs. So when we're going through data entry and we enter an email, we transition into enter email, we want to update our context. So we define an action called set email, and then the same thing for password. Right now they're plain strings, but there will be a time where we will define what those actions are. I like thinking about it as just like a mental model of how your UI should operate and just like what happens on each transition and what happens when you go from one transition to the next. Guards. Guards are sort of like those things that prevent from, like, that will throw errors. They will help you define what a specific error looks like or when it should be triggered with condition, and then it will move into the target state if that condition is met. So for example, when the user blurs an input, I don't know if it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but when the user blurs an input on email blur, the condition, we're checking if the condition is bad email format is met, and then we're going to transition to email error bad format and throw a particular error message. And so invoke. Once we've gone through the entire process of like entering email, blurring email, and then finally get to the submit state or submit transition, it will trigger a waiting response state. And at that point, we want to invoke some sort of action. In that case, we will define source for it, which is request sign in, and then two states, on done and on error. Basically, the invoke method allows us to declare promise and transition to different states, depending on what the promise returns. The source property takes a function that has two parameters. So request sign in will take two parameters, context, which we've been saving the information in, and event. If the promise returns successfully, we will transition to the state defined in the on done property. And if the error is returned, we will transition to the state defined in the error property. And our final state, basically we declare that when we've reached the final state for the state machine. So at that point, we've received some sort of data from the API, we've transitioned out of the UI, and we're now dealing with data in our store. So in this case, it's called on authentication, and we basically will be, in this function, we will trigger our call. We will trigger our action from Mobx. It will probably make sense when I show you the demo, but basically those are all the concepts that we really need to be familiar with to build UI with Mobx and Xstate. A couple of resources that I've used for this talk and just in general, I don't know if you're able to see them, but the one is from CSS Tricks, and it's called Using React and Xstate to Build a Sign-In Form, which is excellent. And then there is an article by the creator of Mobx, some French name, so I can't really remember it, but it is becoming fully reactive and in-depth explanation of observables. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn as Daria Caldwell, and then on GitHub as Daria Whitecastle, if you would like. All right, so it's demo time. So help me, Jesus. Maybe Sam. I need to get out of this thing first.
I get referred to as Jesus all the time.
Okay, we'll do a quick demo, and then I'll show the code. I feel like this is more interesting part, but we're all different. Can you all see, or should I zoom in a little bit? Okay. All right. So if I'll start typing here, and then I'm blurring the input, my error is triggered. Please enter a valid email. So I'll trigger oops. And we'll do this once because there's a bug I haven't solved yet. Okay, and then now I'm blurring password, and then the password is too short, and then my logout and submit buttons are disabled. So I'll do this, and then do submit. Kind of does the, it's like a fake API call, and then it tells us from the user store that this is our current user. We can also do log out, and then I'll show you what the error state kind of looks like, or how it will look if we received a bad response from the API. All right, hopefully refreshed. All right, password is too short. All right, and then now it's showing us a problem contact in the server. So, do we have time to go through code, or, okay. Do you want to take more time? Yeah, I'm gonna try to mirror displays now. Okay, so this is our user store, and this is all the setup that is required for Mobx. So there's some great hooks that Mobx and React Mobx provide. So we're just importing action and observable from Mobx, and then we're using create context from React. And this is all there is really for storing this observable user and then creating an action to update it. Right now, we're naively saving email and password, but of course you won't do that, but for demo purposes. And then there's some kind of like extra, a setup that you need to do for creating context and for it to communicate with other parts of your application. But it's really cool. Now we'll go through machine. It's a little bit longer, but we won't focus too much on some like syntax and stuff like that, but here you can see that we have initial state data entry, context with email and password, and then as we were kind of going through that before, we have email with action of set email, password, then some guards for when our email blurs or password blurs, and then on submit, we're gonna set up like 2 extra guards, both email and password, and then eventually we're going to transition to the target of awaiting response if neither of those conditions are met. In awaiting response, we have this source with request sign in. We have defined our success state for on done, and then on error, we have no account or incorrect password or service error. So if I collapse these things here, you'll see that in your states, you just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states, and then within them, like I found that helpful, just sort of collapsing and making sure that I'm still like keeping on the right course. And then within them, you just define transitions and guards and stuff like that. And then the second option that, or the second thing that Xstate library provides us with is machine options. And then here, we can define those actions. Remember that string that we defined? Set email and set password and authentication? Here we go. So here are our actions, and they both get context and event. And from the context, we can get the value. And event is useful in some other cases. You always get those two parameters. Sometimes you don't need to use both, so you can just use one of them. And here we also define our guards. All of your guards are kind of like all of your UI logic is why you would want to invalidate some sort of input is right here. So it's not scattered all over your application. It's not, you don't need to worry, like you don't need to figure out like where is this being called. This is all right here. And you can see exactly what's happening. I think it's a lot cleaner and more straightforward. And then the last thing we provide here is services. So that service for request sign-in, here you would normally do your API call. Here's just a fake API call. And then how it all hooks up in React application, basically. We import a few things from Mobx React. We import a few things from Xstate and Xstate React, such as machine and this hook use machine. And basically, here's our setup. So we have the context. This is where we get the information from the store, from Mobx store. So we set up current user, or we get the information for user. We create state machine. We provided 2 parameters, which is config and options that we've defined earlier. And then from the hook, we get current and send. Current refers to the context, and send refers to the way of updating the machine. So current to get it, send to update it. And in our actions, we can, in our basically application logic, we can reference things like current.match is awaiting response and then do something, or an error and then provide the specific error that we want to show. And here's how we dispatch different types of actions, or transitions, basically. I think it's pretty straightforward. There's definitely a way to abstract it even a little bit more, but I like the way that everything is very deterministically handled within the machine, and all of the UI logic is in one place. So that's all. Thanks so much. Oh yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
With the actions and targets and everything being swing rates, what kind of feedback do you get if you mistype something?
That's a really good question. So the question is, what kind of feedback you get if you mistype something? Xstate does provide some good feedback. It will throw an error saying like this particular transition is not defined, and it will show you the name of the transition. And that's actually one of the optimizations that we did in our production level app, where we took out all the strings and sort of like defined them and then referenced them from one place. Yeah. Anybody else? Hey. Oh, also a great question. So for the question is, are there any dev tools? So that's one of the things that I would say is not as well defined or not as well maintained for Mobx. There are dev tools for Mobx, but they're just not as robust as React or Redux dev tools. One more? Anyone else? Go ahead. Sure. Yeah, I'm not actually sure. So the question is there TypeScript support? We don't use TypeScript. I wish we did, but we don't use TypeScript currently, so I'm not sure if there is TypeScript support. That would be cool.
Yeah, and then my second question is more kind of on the back-end side. Like, so if you're exposing kind of actions in your state machine, like on your front end, is there a way to kind of manage a very similar state machine on the back end to verify those kind of, I guess, states and transitions on what you're expecting both the UI and the back end to accept?
I think that's a really cool concept, but I think Xstate is actually, as far as I know, it's only for front end. There's definitely a need for something like that on the back end. I can definitely see that. But it's not, because it's so focused on the UI transitions, it's not actually going to be talking to your back end at that point. All right. If you have any other questions, just come talk to me afterwards. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Daria.
Be offended, I'll just ignore it. So, quick agenda. First, I'm going to go over who am I, because as I said, I've been here 3 weeks, and not a single one of you actually knows who I am. Then I'm going to talk about what is D3, which maybe I can skip if everyone in here knows what D3 is. Okay, so I got one, so I can skip it, right? No. Then I'm going to talk about when to not use D3 effectively, which kind of short circuits my entire talk if you really think about it. But there is a reason for that, and I will talk about it. And trust me, your bosses will all appreciate me having that section in there. Then, for those one of you who is used to D3, you've seen the 3 little circles tutorial on Mike Bostock Solve Everything. That's his tutorial. Well, I'm going to walk you through that using D3 and using React. And then I'm going to talk about next steps, show you a little bit of code sample. I don't have a live demo. The reason for that is a couple of years ago, I was roped into doing a D3 class for my former employer. And I spent 50 hours building a big slide deck with all the code in line and interactives. And I got a 2% raise that year, and it was just not worth it. So I don't do live demos anymore. So, who am I? I'm Andrew Schreiber. I'm a full stack engineer at a company called Owl Labs. For those of you frantically Googling, yes, we are in Boston. I am a full-time remote worker. I spent 2 days in an office in the last 3 years. It's awesome. I highly recommend you push your employers to offer remote benefits. If you have any questions about that, let me know. We just published the State of Remote Work 2019, actually this morning. So we talk about salaries, we talk about benefits, we talk about who does remote work, and it's actually really cool. We make a telepresence camera. It's a 360-degree camera. I was going to bring one, and then I'm like, it's heavy, it's designed for sitting on a conference table, and I have no idea how far I'm going to have to walk, so I just didn't. I recently relocated from Durham, North Carolina. For those of you who have been to North Carolina and understand why I relocated, okay, that's all I have to say. I spent 8 years at a company called MITRE, the last 5 or 6 of which were in the healthcare space. Who here has actually heard of MITRE? Oh my gosh, that's actually 2 more than I expected. My running joke is that MITRE is the largest company you've never heard of. They are a $1.6 billion nonprofit. Their peers are Sandia National Labs and that group. So when I say I was in healthcare, I say I was on the healthcare policy side. I dealt with Medicare abuse and helping guide policy. So if you ever want to rant about healthcare, let me know. My hobbies mostly involve robots and 3D printing. I build robots, they're fun, and I'm in the middle of building a 2nd or 3rd 3D printer at this point. This is myself and my other half, Riley, who can't be here tonight. She's actually sick. She's a preschool teacher. So yeah, formerly a dev, now has code running on a satellite, goes to a preschool teacher. So what is D3? It's a JavaScript library, obviously. That's helpful here. It is designed to bind data to your DOM. And for any of you who are familiar with React, you're raising that little red flag of, wait, this doesn't make sense. How can these 2 things coexist? It also has some really nice convenience methods. So this chord diagram, who would know the first step to laying this out? Because I wouldn't. But D3 does. Mike Bostock, brilliant guy, has nice helper methods for doing this sort of thing. Some things it's not, that it's frequently accused of being. It is not a graphing library. In fact, if you say, how do I D3 box plot, you're going to get a lot of questions asking that exact thing, and then a bunch of code showing you nothing helpful because you're not going to understand it. It is confusing. Hopefully I can demystify some of that. It is not an SVG library. In fact, D3 does not have to work with SVG. It can work with your normal HTML elements. It can actually talk to Canvas. It can do a lot of different things. So anyone who tells you it's an SVG graphing library, they're wrong. So I just need a bar chart. My boss says I need a bar chart. I've used Victory.js for this. I've been working with D3 for a decade, and I still reach for Victory.js when my boss says I just need a bar chart. Why? It's going to handle all your edge cases for you. It's going to deal with all that state management that you don't want to deal with. D3 is not going to be the fastest approach. It's still not the fastest for me, because what do I do when I don't have data? What do I have to do when the data changes? What do I do when the data goes outside of this? I don't want to have to think about those for everything. If I can hit something and npm install Victory.js and get a bar chart in 5 minutes, my boss is going to be happy. So if all your boss is asking is a bar chart, a line chart, something simple, reach for a library. It's going to save you time. Now, when to use D3? If you are working with a graphic designer that is pixel perfect, everything has to be my way, or they're going to throw a book at your head, who works with those people? Because I have, and it was awesome. That is when you use D3. D3 is great for that. D3 is when you're working with doctors who are adamant that they have to have 1,024 layers of grayscale on this DICOM image. The human eye cannot see 256 layers, but they know that. But they still admit, and they're adamant, that they need 1024. That's when you reach for D3, when you've got a customer that is completely, has to be my way, needs to be custom. So let's talk about 3 little circles. 3 little circles is the intro to all of D3. It's what Mike Bostock recommends everyone start with, and it is pretty much the simplest D3 thing you can make. Spoiler alert, this is actually not all of the code. There is more to it, but this is the important parts of it. So on the white side, I'm not going to try right and left. It's not going to work. On the white side is the React version. Everyone here recognizes and understands that, right? It's pretty simple. I'm rendering a circle with a radius. Yes, I left out keys for anyone who's going to complain. I'm working with limited space here. So on the D3 side, we're talking about this D3.selectAll circles. Well, I'm going to guess that selects all the circles, but what's creating the circles? There's actually another call.enter that adds the circle element down below. I just didn't copy and paste it in because it's literally .enter append circle. Then I take the data, I bind it. The attribute R is being set to the function. These are equivalent pieces of code. Which one would you rather write? The React one, right? Well, that's good because React and D3 will actually conflict if you try and write code that are D3 style. So we select all the circle elements, bind the data to them, and then set the power to the expression returned by the function. Okay. Well, everyone should understand that pretty easily. It's just plain JavaScript. With React, what's going to happen is you're going to have 2 things claiming the DOM, and React is going to start complaining, and I don't even know what error it's going to give you anymore because it's not going to be a pretty error, and React does, in theory, give you some way of opting out of it controlling parts of your DOM. Please don't do that. It's going to make your life a headache because there's simpler ways to do it. React's much simpler. Everyone likes that. So why would I actually want to use D3 if it's going to screw up my DOM, it's more complicated, and it's a pain in my butt to use, as I just explained to you? So it's a JavaScript library, so it's pretty simple to use. It's an npm install away. And those convenience methods, those are really, really nice. And that's actually the big reason I don't have a live demo, because I have no idea what problem space you're trying to solve. So this is actually a circle packing of D3, all of the little libraries in it. When I say D3 is big, I'm not kidding. It will do a lot of things. I'm going to point at this one because I don't feel like running over there. This is it for the querying stuff. So all that select stuff is in that. Everything else is the convenience methods that you guys want to use because they're really, really nice. So I guess I probably should have pointed to this one because it's bigger. I just forgot I had done a larger version of it. So this is a non-exhaustive list. The scaling functions. So you need a linear scale. That's easy enough to write. Anyone can do that. But what if you need to clamp it down so if it goes outside of that, it won't go bigger? Or you need a logarithmic scale, or you need a power scale, or you need a color scale. D3 has helper methods for all of those. And how many of you work with geographic data at work? How many of you work with geographic data at home for fun? Okay, apparently I'm a weirdo. How many of you know anything about geographic projections? How many of you know less than you actually need to know? Because I don't know much about them, and I've spent years with them. D3 will handle a lot of that stuff for you. Number and date formatting, stuff that is just a constant pain. Libraries for it. Voronoi for finding the nearest sections around it. A lot of complicated math that I'm not very good at. Hex binning, Sankey diagrams. Who knows what a Sankey diagram is? It's the flow diagram that you typically see in financials. And it's actually a really cool diagram and really useful for a lot of things. You know, I can't remember the name. The guy who did the Napoleon diagram for the Napoleon's March, that's actually a Sankey diagram. Same concept. It can help you with that. There's a helper library just for doing that. Array helpers. So yeah, okay, I can find the min and the max of an array. I can find the extents of it. I can find the average. But you know what? I'm inevitably going to screw something up when I do that, because I just wrote a quick little function to do it, and I missed some edge case, like not a number, or, oh, hey, there's a string in this thing for some unknown reason. Data is never clean. Time helpers. I don't like working with time. It's in there. Color scales, manipulating colors. So if you're saying, hey, I have this HSV color, and I need it to be slightly brighter, there's convenience helpers for that. I don't want to learn the math to do it. It's complicated for anyone that's ever looked. I can keep reading these. There's a lot. I really could, but it's useful stuff if you want to, say, do a force-directed diagram, which I'm going to show how to do a force-directed graph with React and D3. So what is it? Your first steps are to learn SVG. When I say SVG, everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? SVG is kind of the standard way to do interactive visualizations. It's really easy. You can bind things the same way you would in React. Just treat them like normal React elements. You can render it with your normal React workflow, however that is. If you want to use Mobx, you want to use Redux, you want to use whatever, I don't care. Where this does break down, React Native. React Native and SVG do not, or the last time I tried to do it, did not play nicely together. May require some work. This is mostly a talk about React on the web, though. Sorry. And then you're going to end up using your D3 libraries to do the heavy lifting for the math. So scales are super helpful. I find that in almost every single project I do that involves data visualization, I reach for a scale of some sort. And so I just D3-scale and installs, and I'm good. Array utilities, fairly simple stuff. Date format parsers. So if you're dealing with TSVs, CSVs, who thinks the proper way to parse a CSV is with string.split? Oh, thank God, no one said yes. It's not. It's complicated, and there's a helper for it. Formatting, geoprojection, stuff like that. Really useful stuff. If you've got a problem space that you're used to and you work in, go and dig into that section of D3 and learn it very well. As you saw, there's a lot of surface area for learning it, and it's nasty. So this is the force-directed graph in D3 and React. You'll notice up at the top it is plain old JavaScript, and in the bottom it is plain old React. So I'm going to be completely honest with you. I lied a little bit. This is not D3 and React. It is D3 and then React. You can use the two completely interchangeably and separate until you need D3, bring it in. Just use your normal React workflow. All this is doing, I'm not going to try and point at that. That's just going to make me dizzy, and I'm not going to hold the microphone anymore. This is generating a force collider, saying that there's some radius, do some iterations. That's telling it this is my collider method, so call this and deal with that. There's setting some sort of attractor, and this is all fairly standard D3 stuff. You can find this in almost any tutorial on force-directed graphs. Then I'm creating a simulation, telling all that stuff. The regions is actually my data set. In this case, it is actually the states of the United States. They are put roughly where they are based on a geoprojection. And, well, you'll see what it does in a second, but it's actually interesting. And then I just run 300 ticks of it. The thing that does still suck with React is animation. Animation in React still sucks. D3 does not help with that, unfortunately. I'm still working on finding good workarounds for that. I wish I had a good answer that was nice and easy for you, but I don't. So I run my simulation, and then I render out an SVG, and I render some groupings, and then a hex, which is just a literal hexagon with the state name in it. And I just render it where it is. And we're going to come back to this in a second because there's some weird little tricks in here, but this is what it renders. So for those of you guys who saw the 538 visualization with the states, well, I didn't have to have some static thing. If I wanted to go to counties, I don't have to have a giant array like they implemented. I can just kind of put the counties right where their centroid is and call it a day. And it's going to render it out on its own. Let's say I wanted to scale these based on their electoral college votes. Well, now I just set the radius equal to that, and my little force collider is going to pick up on that automatically. And it will all lay itself out, and it will look roughly like the United States, but it will have the different shape. So the weird part I did want to call out is actually something that took me a while to figure out in SVG, and I just wanted to pass it on because it's something that if you are doing SVG and D3 is really helpful. It'll save you a lot of time. When I say that SVG is kind of a unitless mess, you guys understand. So if I set an SVG box on my screen, who knows how many units it is? I can't use percentages in SVG. It doesn't have that concept. Not well. And if I want to draw some text, how do I do that? Well, I can't say it in terms of EM. I have to give it a pixel height. So one trick that I've picked up, and I don't think I'm going to be a highlight here, is this SVG viewbox parameter. And what it does is it says that regardless of how big this thing is on your page, it is in fact from 0, 0 to 1,000, 1,000. I am making a fixed size thing. I know exactly how many pixels I can talk to inside of that space. And then I can just treat it as, hey, I'm just a coordinate system that I can work with. And if I scale my page down, it automatically scales everything down for me. And if I scale my page up, it automatically scales my page up for me. If I rotate, cool. There's some other stuff you can play with to get rotation correctly, so it'll make sure it scales correctly. But that's the big trick on how to use React with D3, to be honest with you. Style it with CSS, style it with however you want to do it normally. Set that view box to the right size, and your stuff's going to render. And it really is that simple. So that is the output of it. Yo.
So as far as the view box versus the height and width, the height and width control the size of the box or the rest of the page?
Yep. So you're drawing a rectangle, that width and that height, and inside that rectangle is a coordinate system between those points. And if you want to make everything based off of, let's say you want to set 1,000 pixels, but you want 0, 0 to be dead center. So you change that 0, 0 to -500, -500, and those 2,000s to 500, 500. Now 0, 0 is the center of your coordinate system. Be warned. This is a very good way to make your head hurt, because an SVG element can contain an SVG element. So now I can have another coordinate system inside. And in fact, we are doing that here in this call to this G element, which is a group. It defines a new coordinate system. So that hex is actually defined in terms of inside that. They're all the same hex, rendering at 0, 0 inside that G element, and then I move the G element around. It does some weird stuff. And you can give yourself a really big headache, so don't put SVG in SVGs. But if you need to, you can, and it works really cool. So that's it. As I said, no live code demo, nothing fancy. I guess now is a good time to mention Owl Labs is in fact hiring. Unfortunately, it is network engineers and robotics engineers. So if you know anyone with 5+ years of C++, let me know. We are trying to hire. It is fully remote. And if you've got questions that you come up with after this, or as I said, want to throw things, it's Andrew Schreiber on the Denver Dev Slack. I think I'm the only Schreiber there, so SCH, and that should probably get you close enough. Questions?
Are we off? Oh, no. Cool. Thanks so much, Andrew. That pretty much does it for tonight. I guess I did have a couple last items. So we are always looking for volunteers to speak, to sponsor, to help out with the meetup. If you're interested in getting involved with the community, with this meetup in particular, we're always in need of help. There were 3 of us here tonight, Gabby and David and myself. So huge thanks to them for being here. But certainly some months, people have trips and get sick and things like that. So we're always looking for help there, always looking for speakers. I believe we maybe have one open.